Tonight I'd like to tell you the story The Keeping Quilt, from a story by Patricia Palacio, adapted by Nancy Chameau. When Great-Grandma Anna came to America, she wore the same thick overcoat and heavy boots she had worn for farm work. But her family weren't dirt farmers anymore. Her father's job in New York City was hauling things on a wagon, and the rest of the family made artificial flowers all day. The only things Anna had left of back home Russia were her dress and a babushka that she would wear and then throw into the air when she was dancing. But her dress became too small, and after her mother had sewn Anna a new one, she took Anna's old dress and babushka, and then from a basket of old clothes she took Uncle Vladimir's shirt, Aunt Havila's nightdress, and an apron from Aunt Natasha. "We'll make a quilt to help us always remember home. It will be like having the family in back home Russia dance around us at night." And so it was. Anna's mother invited in all the neighborhood ladies. They cut patterns from the clothing scraps, and Anna kept the needles threaded and handed them to them when they needed them. They created the keeping quilt from all the pattern pieces. On Friday nights, Anna's mother would say prayers and start the Sabbath. The family had challah and chicken soup, and the quilt was the tablecloth. Anna grew up and fell in love with Great-Grandpa Sasha. He gave her a gold coin, a flower, and a pinch of salt in a handkerchief. The gold was for wealth, the flower was for love, and the salt was that they might always have flavor in their life. Anna and Sasha promised each other love and understanding as they stood beneath the wedding chuppah, which had been made from the keeping quilt. After the wedding, the men and the women celebrated separately. When Anna's daughter Carly was born, Anna wrapped her in the quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carly was given gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold, that she would not know poverty, the flour for love, salt for flavor in her life, and bread so that she would never know hunger. Carly learned to keep the Sabbath, cook and clean, and wash, and one day the quilt again became a chuppah for her wedding, as Carly and Grandpa George were married. Men and women celebrated together this time, but they did not dance together. Carly and George moved to Michigan, and Great-Grandma Anna went with them. The quilt once again wrapped a new baby girl named Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen came to call Anna Lady Grandma. But Lady Grandma had grown old and tired. She now used the quilt to cover her legs and keep her warm. After her 98th birthday, Anna died. She was covered with the quilt as prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. Mary Ellen grew up, and when she left her parents' home, she took the quilt with her. When she became a bride, the quilt again became a wedding chuppah. And for the first time, friends who were not Jews were invited to the wedding. Mary Ellen wore a suit, but she still had gold, flour, and salt in her bouquet. The quilt became to welcome Mary Ellen's little daughter, Patricia, into the world. It was a tablecloth for Patricia's first birthday. And at night when Patricia would go to bed, she would trace the patterns in the quilt with each fingers, as her mother told her whose clothing had made each pattern, whose dress, whose shirt, whose apron had made all the pretty patterns in the quilt. Then Patricia used the quilt as her magic cape, or her bullfighter cape, or her tent when she was camping in the hot Amazon jungle. At Patricia's wedding, men and women danced together. In her bouquet was gold, salt, bread, and a sprinkle of wine so that she would always know laughter. In a few years, Patricia had a daughter, Tracy, and she wrapped her in the quilt for the first time. And then her brother followed a few years later. Stephen John was also wrapped in the quilt and welcomed into the family. Just like their mother, their grandmother, and their great-grandmother, they used the quilt to celebrate birthdays and make superhero capes. As the years passed, Tracy and Stephen grew up listening to the stories that their grandmother told, and she always told the story of the keeping quilt and each piece of pattern and whose clothing it came from, and she knew everyone in the family who had contributed to the making of the quilt. Patricia now waits for her own grandchildren to come along as Tracy and Stephen have grown up. She is excited to share the stories of the quilt and trace their family heritage as far back to back home Russia, where they first came. It will be exciting for Patricia to be telling the story of the keeping quilt. Thank you. Good night.